So let's start going down the evolutionary tree and kind of look at the different subdivision of animals as well as the different characteristics that comes up over time as evolution is occurring in animals and what characteristics are associated with different phylums. So let's start first by looking at this phylum, Protostome. So Protostome are flat animals, and so these are the simplest known animals. They have no body symmetry, meaning that if I were to try to split this animal, there's no clear left or right that I can divide it into. They also have no tissues, so their cells are not organized into tissue cells, and they have 4 different types of cells. Here you can see this example of this placozoan, which is the trichoplex, a heron. So you can see the movement right here and see that they're actually their common name is a flat animal because you can see they kind of have a very flat shape to them. So the first branch we're going to visit is the Parazoa. And so the only phylum that really exists under the Parazoa is the phylum that includes the sponge. And so this is the phylum Porphyra. So Porphyra includes sponge, and the characteristic that sponge have is that they tend to live in marine water area. They are attached to the seafloor and other surfaces in the water. And you can see, like if we look at this image right here, that sponges also do not have clear symmetry. So there's no place that I can really cut this and have a symmetrical left or right? Like if I cut right here, these two do not match. And if I cut right here, this side and this side does not match. So they don't have any clear symmetry. As we mentioned, they do not have tissues or organs, so their cells are not while they're multicellular, their cells are not organized in a hierarchy of tissues and organ, which means that they also do not have a cilium because they do not have a body cavity. And similar to their common ancestor, they have cells that have flagellae on them. So if you look at the pores here, these cells will have flagellae associated with them that allows them, so you can see kind of here, right? It has this flagella over here that's attached to these collar cells that allows them to move the water around and be able to filter the water in order for them to get different food sources that they can ingest for energy. We're now going to branch into Eumetazoa from Parazoa. And the big distinction between Parazoa versus Eumetazoa is that there's no symmetry in Parazoa, while there is in Eumetazoa. So if you recall, the sponges doesn't have a clear left and right symmetry as you will see in the other animals. So for example, with humans, we see a clear bilateral between our left side and our right side. Another distinction between Parazoa versus Eumetazoa is this lack of tissue cells in Parazoa. So in Parazoa, while they're multicellular, their cells do not organize into tissues, where we start seeing the development of tissues and organs in Eumetazoa. So first, let's visit the Rattata, which would be our phylum of Cnidaria. So the phylum Cnidaria here, we're starting to see some radiosymmetry, and we're starting to see the formation of the germ layer. So going from 0 germ layer in sponges to now 2 germ layers. So the phylum Cnidaria has no true tissues. So this is similar with sponges that also do not have true tissue, but they are radically symmetrical animals with 2 germ layers. So what do we mean by radically? That means that these animals are symmetrical when we cut them on a plane. So it's not a bilateral, but it's a radical, which means that we can cut them and start seeing some symmetry in a more circular dimension. And then I mentioned that there are 2 germ layers. So we're starting to observe the ectoderm and the endoderm. There are 2 basic body forms of animals that fall under Cnidaria. So the first one is the pulpit, in which the mouth So you can see here is directed upward from the substrate. So they have a tubular on one end that's attached to the surface, and their mouth is open. So this would be like the sea anemone that you would see at low tides if you were to go to Monterey or in Santa Cruz. And then we have another body form, which is the medusa. And so with this one, the mouth is actually directed downward. And this is what we typically see in the ones that we recognize as jellyfish, right? So the mouth is actually downward, and they tend to be bell-shaped, and they tend to, rather than being attached to surface, they tend to just drift. There are other characteristics that we tend to associate with Cnidaria. So one of them is this jelly-like substance called mesia, and this is the jelly-like substance that we often observe lying between the two layers of Cnidarian body, and it provides them some structural support. We also have these specialized cells called cnidocyte that has pneumocytosis in them, and so these cnidocytes are specialized stinging cells that we find in Cnidarian that contains these pneumatocysts. And so these are organelles that are in the tentacle cells, and when they are either feeding or they get defensive, they will typically discharge this thread out here, and this can lead to jelly, what we know as jellyfish sting. So these pneumatocysts that we see here are these barbed thread-like structure that can actually contain venom. And so when a jellyfish does sting you, it can result in these blood blisters that we observe right here. And so this is a video that actually shows how the jellyfish sting, and like always, I will post them onto our video channel page, so you can go ahead and take a look at them. So let's move on to the next branch of evolution, which is the protostome. So there's quite a lot of phylum in the protostome. So we'll start off looking at the phototrophozoa, which includes the flatworm and the mollusk. And what we observe here is we're going to observe the evolution of the bilateral symmetry, as well as the cephalization, that is the formation of the brain, the nerves, and different sensory cells, as well as moving from 2 germ layers to 3 germ layers. So let's take a look at the superphylum Lophotropozoa. So this is one of the largest group of bilateral animals. This group of animals are believed to be the last ancestor of the Parazoa, and it includes many different phylum. One of the phylum is the Platyhelminths. So this will include our flatworms. Another one would be the Rotifera, which includes the rotifer. You have the phylum Nemertea, which would be our ribbon worms, as well as mollusks. So this is an example of mollusks, as well as like octopus, as well as snails and slugs. And then you have the Annelida, which will include earthworms as well as leeches. So next, I just wanted to show some features and characteristics that we see in some of these animals that are no longer really found in a lot of the terrestrial members. So when we move from water to land, a lot of these characteristics that we observe in the marine animals, we no longer observe once they move to land. One of the features that's not really observed anymore in Lophotropozoas is these feeding organs that we find in certain protozoans. So while we do observe these structures in certain protozoans, most of Lophotropozoas does not have these feeding organs. Another characteristic that's not really observed is having a translucent free-swimming larva stage. And so this isn't found as animals that migrate from water to land, so we don't find them in the terrestrial member, but these small free-swimming larvae were originally found in a lot of mollusks as well as Annelida. And these larvae, you can see their structure here, they're also known as trochophore, And so the distinction with trophophore is you can see they have these little cilia right here that allows them to basically kind of move in the water. And so this is the larva state, and at an adult state, they are no longer in the state right here. And we don't observe this in terrestrial members. The next phylum we're going to look at is the phylum of Platyhelminthes, which are also known as flatworms. So here you have the flatworm right here. You can see that they have these eye spots. They're the first protostomes, and you can see the formation of the bilateral symmetry, right? So with these worms, you can see that I can do a clear division between my left and my right. Flatworms are coelomate, which means that they currently do not have a body cavity, but we can start seeing the formation of a brain and eye spot, that is cephalization. They're also starting to develop chemical sensitive organs, which means they can actually sense light and other sensory. And flatworms are actually hermaphrodite, which means that they can actually cross-fertilize. And this is because they contain both male as well as female sex organs. You can actually see that here, where you have the genital cord, where they can have both male and female reproductive organ. So they can self-fertilize, but they can also fertilize with other animals and individuals in the same species. And so this video right here will kind of show you an example of, I don't know if I want to call it a mating ritual, but basically these two different flatworms are fighting to try to determine which one is going to be the one that actually carries the offspring. One last thing that's kind of interesting about flatworm is they do have a muscular sphinx, which we can see right here. So this muscular sphinx can act as a mouth to be able to ingest food, and the sphinx is lined with different epithelial cells that can secrete digestive enzyme. What's interesting is they have an incomplete digestive system, so they only have one opening and closing. So the pharynx can act both as a mouth as well as a opening for expelling digestive waste. So they'll also remove waste through that same opening. We talked about how they have chemical sensitive organs. So one of the things that they're able to also sense is they actually can sense chemical cues from food to be able to detect their food. So think about like when you walk by like a nice bakery and you can smell that fresh bread being cooked. Similarly, these little flatworms can also detect different chemical senses in order to find their food. So some other examples of other animals that's under this phylum would be the parasitic flatworm. So you have this parasitic flatworm right here, and this is a tapeworm, and the tapeworm actually have these hooks right here that can be used to attach to the host. And so this video right here kind of shows you a video of a tapeworm that is parasitic and is actually invading this guy's system, right? And so they're endoparasites, which means that they live inside. So endo versus exo, endo would be an internal parasite. We also have fluke, which is another parasite. So this is also an endoparasite. And you can see that also, we can't really see from this picture, but they also have a sucker that allows them to basically attach on in order to attach to their host. So if I can go my whole life without ever seeing a live tapeworm or flukes, I'm pretty okay. So the next phylum we'll kind of visit is the phylum Mollusca. So Mollusca have 3 body parts. So they have their visceral mass, which is where their internal organs are. They have their mental, which kind of covers the internal organ, and many of them can secrete a shell to kind of protect those internal organs. And then oftentimes we will have a foot, which is right here, so they can actually attach to the surface, and they'll use that foot for locomotion. Some, not all, mollusks will feed using a radula. So you can see here they have a radula that allows them to be able to feed. So it's kind of like a tongue but with teeth, and so they can actually use it to kind of scrape their food. Okay, so some of the classes that we will actually observe in this phylum falls into gastropod. So these are our snails and our slugs that we often see. Snails and slugs can be either herbivore or carnivore, and the snails that live on land versus the ones that are in marine areas will use the mantle to actually breathe. So the mantle, as we mentioned before, is the outer protection for the organs, and so terrestrial snails will actually use that to help breathe. One of the interesting gastropods that I think is super pretty, but they're also extremely dangerous, are the blue dragon sea slugs. So I'm putting a link there just so you can see them. But if you ever actually see these in the wild, do not pick them up, do not touch them. They're beautiful, really bright, don't touch them. Another class is the bivalves. So these are our mussels, our clams, our scallop, the oysters, right? All of these have hinged two-part shells that can open up. They tend to be filter feeders. So you can kind of see here that they have some tentacles that allows them to kind of be able to move the food in, but then they will filter through to actually feed. And so this video right here is really cute, just a little scallop swimming away. And another one is my personal favorite. This would be the cephalopods. So cephalopods are going to include squids, octopus, and the nautilus, which is this guy right here. And so the cephalopods all have pre-developed nervous system and brains, so they're one of the most intelligent invertebrates. They also a lot of times will have a foot that evolved into tentacles around the head. So here you can see the tentacles that kind of evolved, as well as right here, what used to be a foot you can see has evolved into a tentacle. And so here is this cute little video of this nautilus that you can actually see swimming around. If you go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, you can also observe a lot of different cephalopods. They have octopus there, they have squids there, and they also have this nautilus. Okay, so let's kind of move from flatworm and mollusks over to Annelida, which is going to be our segmented worms. So Annelida are, like I said, segmented worms. They are also bilateral, and you can see the segmentation. We often can observe them on earthworms, where you can actually see the different segmentation. Annelida have a complete digestive tract. So unlike before, when we saw that with the Platyhelminths, that they did not have a complete digestive system, so the pharynx act both as a mouth as well as where they would secrete their digestive waste. A worm, this earthworm, this Annelida, actually has a complete digestive system. So they have a mouth, but they also have an anus to actually secrete their waste. They have a fluid-filled coelom, so you can see right here, they have a fluid-filled coelom, so that is that they actually have a body cavity, and they have different body systems. So we're starting to see some hierarchy as we move to Annelida, right? So we're starting to see that they have digestive tract, they have a nervous system, they have an excretory system, and so this is kind of the different evolutionary trends that we're starting to observe as we move in that chart that we were looking at previously. So here is a video on Australian blood-sucking leeches. Leeches both fascinate me and kind of scare me. So this one is a blood-sucking one that you can, I'm not really sure what's happening in this picture really, but yeah, if you want to see the video of Australian blood-sucking leeches, I'll attach that with this video so you can actually observe it. And so in this phylum we have many different animals, right? Everything from earthworms to different marine native worms, and so you have one right here, to leeches. And so between all three, I don't expect you to really memorize and know all the different details here. What I want you guys to recognize with this is that what we're moving from, as we move from Parazoan to Eumetazoan and moving from the different phylum to Anida, that we're starting to see the three germ layers, right? You're starting to see that symmetry where you have the bilateral that we talked about, where you have the formation of the cephalization here, and we also have blastophore development. So because we are still in the protostome, these blastophore will form the mouth first. And additionally, we see animals in the protostome can be acoelomate, which means they don't have a body cavity, pseudocoelomate, which means they have an incomplete one, or with the worms, for example, we see coelom, which means that they have a full body cavity. Okay, so let's look at the last set of animals in the protostome. So we're going to now visit the ecdysozoa, which includes the nematodes and the arthropods. And so what we'll observe here is, for example, the nematode, we start observing roundworms, and we also start observing segmented appendages. So you can see some segmented appendages here in this little arthropod. And so starting with nematodes, these are roundworms. They're not segmented. They have a complete digestive tract, and so that means that they have both a mouth as well as an anus right here. And you can see their full digestive tract right here. They have a body cavity, so they're pseudocoelom, and they're often found in both freshwater and seawater as well as in terrestrial and soil. And roundworms can be both free-living or they can be parasitic. So some example of parasitic would be hookworms, pinworms, and then similar to the ones that we saw in lab, it can be a parasite and lead to situation like this illustration right here, where this man has elephantiasis due to roundworms that are infecting him and clogging up his lymphatic vessel, which results in just a lot of swelling. Okay, and then in our next phylum, we have the phylum Arthropoda, which are our arthropods. And so this is actually the most diverse animal phylum. There are millions of species in this phylum. Most of them are insects, but we also have other arthropods that are not insects. So for example, spiders would be one of them, right? So some of the modern arthropods you have probably heard of and seen would be like the horseshoe crabs, spider, ticks, crabs, lobsters, centipede. Those would all be falling under arthropods. So one of the characteristics that arthropods have is they have jointed appendages, right? So you can see these jointed appendages right here. You can actually see the jointed appendages right here. And oftentimes they will have an exoskeleton as well that's made of chitin. So you can see that this chitin, and it must be molted. So classification that arthropods falls under is ecdysozoa, and that actually means shedding of the skin. So you kind of think that that's what happens when their exterior is molted and shedded, is kind of one of the characteristics of why they fall under the ecdysozoa. And in some arthropods, they have to undergo metamorphosis in order to go from larva to adult. And one of the advantages here is actually to reduce competition for food and resources between the larva versus the adult stage. So the larva and the adult stage have different requirements for lifestyle. And so by having those two stages, you're actually reducing some of the competition for different resources, including food. So here are some other classes that you might be familiar with regards to arthropod, right? So we have crustaceans. So these are going to be our shrimp and our crab and our lobster. Some of them even have 10 legs, right? So here we have some images of different crustacean. You also have arachnid, which are our spiders and our scorpions. And so these fall under arthropods, but not insects. And then we have insects themselves, which tend to have 6 legs. And then there also includes this phylum called Diplodocus, which has many legs, right? So these would be like the centipedes and the millipedes. Okay, and crustacean, these ones you can recognize as the shrimp and the lobster. And interestingly, also barnacles are also under crustaceans. They tend to have compound eyes. So you can see here, these guys and this guy, they tend to have compound eyes, and they tend to have 5 pairs of appendages, so they have around 10 legs. And then you can see that oftentimes their head and their thorax are like fused. So you can see kind of right here, this guy's head and thorax kind of fused, forming a structure called the cephalothorax. And the ones that are able to live on land often have the gills above the walking legs. And so these are just some of the characteristics that we will observe with crustaceans. And insects is one of the most diverse sets of arthropods. So there are numerous different types of insects. They're very diverse. And some of the common characteristics is that they tend to have, with regards to their body segmentation, they tend to have head, thorax, and abdomen. And oftentimes their mouth part, you can see right here, for example, is adapted to their particular lifestyle, right? They tend to have 3 pairs of legs. So you end up with 6 legs because there are 3 pairs. And sometimes they have wings. And so not all insects have wings, but they can have 1 or 2 pairs of wings. And here's an interesting video if you're interested in watching it. If you're a bug lover, you can take a look at the biggest bug that was ever found. If you are really into insects at UC Berkeley, they have actually a really big collection of many different insects because they actually have a lot of study in entomology, which is the study of insects. So if you're ever in Berkeley, you're curious, you can actually go and look at the insects collection over there. And that is actually it for this section. So in the first section of this lecture, we looked at Protostome. In the second section of the lecture, which is 11B, we'll actually be looking at Deuterostome.